we often talk about passion, like I want to be, are you passionate about this? That's great, but really determination is more important than passion, because you don't always feel like doing something, but if you're determined, that's a game changer. So determination and like persistence, those kinds of things, I think qualities that aren't always often associated with sort of the creative life. We're more like, oh, I have this feeling, or I have a poetic soul, or which all kind of lends towards like, if I'm in the mood, I will write down beautiful things will strike. And it doesn't, you don't really think of it as a craft, which I think helps. With the other ingredient is humility. So if you have like determination and humility, those are like two of your biggest, that will actually get you past people who have far more talent.
Welcome to the Creative Community Podcast presented by Destination Arete. I'm David, and at this point, normally my brother jumps in and lets you know that he's here. But he's not here today. He is busy. So I got to fly solo as we build this community of creatives who come together to tell inspirational stories by finding creative solutions to those problems. And we're really excited to have on today's show a father-son writing duo, S.D. Smith, the author of the Green Ember series. I have book one here in my hand on the video show. And if you actually read the bottom underneath Sam's big name, S.D. Smith, you'll see illustrated by Zach Franzen, who is a recent guest on the Creative Community Podcast. So it's really neat to kind of start to interview everyone who starts working on these projects. It's pretty cool. But Sam brought his son Josiah with him today, J.C. Smith, and they wrote together a new book, which they'll tell you about in the episode that's coming out actually at the launch of this episode. At the recording of it, it's coming out in the future, but at the launch, it came out in the past. So we're participating in time travel here, as Sam and JC came on to share with us about their book. Jack Zulu is the name of that book. And they also shared kind of the writing process, how that came to be, how working together goes as a father and son, and sometimes fathers and sons have disagreements or they have things that they have to work through. I was really encouraged by that. And then another thing they shared was their heart for their readers, and the most important thing they want their readers to understand whenever they pick up a book by Sam, by Josiah, by the two of them. So that's really cool. This episode is just full of cool stuff like that. So without further ado, here's my interview with J.C. Smith and his father, S.D. Smith.
My name is S.D. Smith, or Sam, and I am the author of the Green Ember series, what people might know me from, which is a middle grade sort of low fantasy adventure series. Think about maybe Lord of the Rings mixed with the Zootopia kind of a thing. It's rabbits with swords. And I like to say that I write new stories with an old soul. I like the sort of classic style, classic virtue, moral imagination. Those are all features of sort of my stories. I also like humor and fun, but I think their new stories, I think they have sort of the pacing of a lot of modern storytelling, and I think that's cool. It's helpful to make the stories more accessible for kids and families. I am a father of four, one wife, 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. We live in rural West Virginia, which is to say we live in West Virginia. And one of my oldest child is a daughter, Anne. She's awesome. My oldest son is Josiah, and he is he's sitting with me today, and he is the co-author of my new series. The first thing I've written outside of the Green Ember series is this new Waylander Jack Zulu series. And I'll let Josiah, or JC, tell you a little bit about him and it.
Hello, I'm JC Smith. Usually most people just call me Josiah. I am also from West Virginia.
We live in the same house.
Imagine that. Yeah. Who knew?
Who would have thought? So this is Jack Zulu's. I have been working on this for 4 years now, something like that, and pretty early on in the process. I've always talked to Dad about my projects, and he's always excited and gets me going with this stuff.
And vice versa, by the way. He helps me. If you like the Green Ember stuff, he's helped me a lot with that over the years.
So a few years back, he pitched the idea of adapting this story that I've been working on into a novel series. And so that's what we've been doing for the past little bit, 2-ish years. And I'm also trying to graduate high school right now. So we'll see how that goes.
We'll see if any of it works. Maybe none of it will work.
Yeah, no big deal. Just writing a book, graduating high school. No problems there. Okay, cool. Well, that's how I got introduced to you guys, was the Green Ember series. And when I saw Rabbits with Swords, I'm a big Wind in the Willows was the first book that ever really kind of grabbed me and like, gave me this idea of like there's something more here. And then my favorite book, listeners of the podcast will be so bored right now they can probably say it with me, but my favorite book is Watership Down. So when I saw Rabbits with Swords, I was like, all right, my two favorite things coming together here, a little Redwall, little Narnia action. So I really enjoyed. I just finished the Green Ember, and we're expecting a little girl in October, so I'm waiting to read the rest of the series with her. I've got 3 more books, the next 3 in that order, so I'm really excited about that. But it's great to meet you. I had a chance to take the Green Writer course, which I know is probably more your answer for homeschool kids who say, I want to be a writer. You're like, well, this is what you need to know, is just go write. But I was curious to know, first, I guess from JC, when did you get the idea that you were like, maybe this is something that I would like to enjoy doing as well? Or was it just kind of like you were always doing it and you were kind of seeing that example from your dad and it just felt kind of more natural?
It kind of feels like yes is the answer to that question. I've always loved stories, and I really for a long time I liked to draw a lot. I was interested in art and like visual storytelling, movies, and then music as well. But I would say 3 or 4 years ago, I was 12, 13-ish. I got really serious about storytelling and trying to learn the ropes about like story structure and how our brains interact with stories and that type of thing. So I would say probably when I was 13, I got really serious about storytelling.
Awesome. And Sam, for you, when people follow you on social media, you have some real strong themes that you are passionate about sharing. And I know one of them is like the types of stories that kids need to consume. And so I wondered if there was a tipping point or a moment that you can point to that were like, all right, this is the stories that kids need, and I have to be the one to write them. Like, can you point to a time like that, or has it always just been something that you've been doing?
So that's like a very mission sort of focused vocation or calling, and that actually isn't the way I came in. I almost had to like reverse engineer, almost like when we shared the Green Ember originally, and we wrote it. You create the thing. It's kind of like for an author, there's sort of these 2 vocations I think of as creation and then connection. You've got to create the story, you got to make it, and actually that involves I think a couple of things too, which is sort of like storytelling and this sort of performance or the craft of writing. There's kind of like 2 jobs in that, so there's a lot of binaries in there, but I don't know if it's binary is the right word. There's a lot of two hand jobs there in each thing. And so this sort of, when we got to the creation part, when we did the creation part, when we got to the connection part, I'm like, what do we, then I had to think about, well, what is this? And before that, I really hadn't thought of it. It was so actually, and I like that. I think that's a kind of a feature, not a bug, because the story's origins were so organic and so rooted in love, because they were stories that I told my kids. So the Green Ember began, not very far from here on a porch, where my oldest daughter, I just started telling her stories about the rabbits hopping around in the yard. It was a very natural kind of a thing. So I wasn't thinking, and then that later involved Josiah and our other kids, and so it was not what's the word, where it wasn't like convoluted. I wasn't trying to sort of construct things. It wasn't an artifice. It was very, very natural, very organic. And I wasn't thinking like, what kind of stories do the kids in the world need? I will create it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it was just born out of love and delight. And so it grew, and actually it was really cool because I got that out loud storytelling time, which was fun and good. But then when the kids were really insistent, hey daddy, you got to write this down. So I'll write it down. That was an iteration, which was this opportunity to sort of like to do it better, which I think it was better. So I love that chance, but at no time during that process was I really thinking like globally. It was just like, it was very, very honest, which, I mean, how often in life do you get to do something like that? Maybe you do, but often other people don't get to see those sort of moments of sincerity and natural sort of organic home life. But this book is completely a process of that. And then we kind of like had to, again, like I said, sort of reverse engineer or figure out, how do we share this? How do I go back and like, how do we tell the story? Oh, I discovered this is sort of like a new story with an old soul. Had to kind of put language to what was actually happening. And really that involved the experience of the audience. So the audience has often, we grew pretty quickly, pretty fast, which was astonishing to us. And then I really got to hear from them, like what was happening. Oh, and I was like, oh, the things that sort of happened with me and my kids, they're happening in your home too. And so it's like this slowly budding awareness, but that has focused me into some more clarity about like what I do value for, or at least what I'm aiming at when I tell stories, which is a lot, shared with Josiah for sure. But yeah, that clarity probably looks like it started earlier, but it really was sort of like defining and came later with the help of a lot of people, including the amazing families in our audience.
Yeah. Well, before we move to the next question, I'm always curious to know, and you guys can both answer this actually, what stories I shared kind of my favorite books. What stories influenced you guys growing up that you say, I can see the influences now in my work as I'm sharing these stories with folks?
I call the Lord of the Rings because I know we both like that. I'm just going to say it first.
That's pretty good.
That and probably the Chronicles of Narnia are the two biggest, at least book series.
You got to think about one that's outside of the two. That's like, so because we all want those, but like, so you got to give us one more outside of like, well, because you also, particularly when we think about this book, there's a lot of influence from like movies and other kind of creators as well.
Yeah. I would say probably, as far as just stories in general go, I'm a big fan of The Karate Kid. I don't know if that counts, but that's like probably my favorite movie of all time. And it's got some, I don't know, it's got some profound things to say about the world.
I love that too. I love that when I was a little kid, and it totally holds up. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. It may seem like, oh, that's a silly, cheesy 80s movie. It maybe is that too, but that's a really rich story. I love it. But you're also influenced by Star Wars, Steven Spielberg, that kind of thing. I think there's a feeling of that in Jack Zulu in The Waylander's Key for sure. I think he's attracted to this sort of like, I don't know, like how do you describe this story? Is like wonderful, like full of wonder, like yeah. And actually, I think really a lot of there's some interest in sort of nostalgic kind of 80s sort of theme stuff now, and which I like a lot of that. I would say it's like a lot of that kind of stuff, but where a lot of that sort of leans into vice, or sometimes even like celebrates sort of the crass and maybe the I don't know, the darker sort of stuff. Like I think that this story is like that. Jack Zulu is like that, but except it sort of leans into virtue, I think, instead.
The virtues that are already present in those classic stories,
Yeah.
So it
cranks that up.
It's more of a Star Wars vision of the 1980s than it is like a Stephen King vision of the 80s.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, it's more Spielberg and more, but innocent, a lot of innocent, but serious too. Got the depth, but it doesn't. But there's not a celebration of vice. It's got a very, I don't know, wholehearted, earnest,
vision of the world, kind of through the eyes of kids. Sometimes you
Yeah.
can see those things more clearly and more virtuously, I think.
Yeah, rich moral imagination. For me, a lot of the same things. I love Tolkien. Tolkien was a huge launching off point for me as well. Actually, before that was Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game, the book game, which just was would turn me into a reader. Really, I just loved that so much, and I always kind of liked science fiction or fantasy, and it wasn't very long till I found the Lord of the Rings, which is for me never been matched. But I love Tolkien's other books too. Smith of Wooten Major, so I think is such a wonderful, formative, powerful book, and Farmer Giles of Ham as well. I love Watership Down too. I didn't read that till pretty late in life. I didn't read till after I wrote The Green Ember because I didn't want sort of any kind of influence. But I love that book. I don't think anybody will ever write a better rabbit book than that. It's fantastic. I'm just looking at my shelf. Let's see any good books back there. Don't we have faces? I love Cry the Beloved Country. That's a really powerful book to me. Really lovely, and a lot about South Africa, I grew up in South Africa kind of as a kid. Okay. So kind of a beautiful story. But basically you can just throw us down as the Lewis and Tolkien. We, Chesterton, we love it. Guilty as Charged, Sherlock Holmes, we love, we're just walking cliches over here. Yep.
Well, something that my brother would say if he was here is the one of the best things about being conservative and even, you know, on the farther even more conservative than you would normally be, is that you get to enjoy the things that last, like as far as popular content. So like things that are popular right now may not last, but when you're conservative, you're always about 10, 15 years behind what's popular. So you're enjoying the things from society that last. And so when you say Tolkien, Ender's Game, Chesterton, you know, Sherlock Holmes, like those are all the classics, right? And why was it classic? It's because it's lasted. It's because it's timeless. It's because it's powerful. So,
Yeah,
all right.
Jane Austen in there,
Yeah,
and Charles
yeah.
Dickens, and I love P.G. Woodhouse. I don't know if P.G. Woodhouse is also such a favorite. Basically, if they use their initials, you know, then they're British. We're probably in.
Yeah.
Okay. I like it a lot. Well, yours and your initials here. So I think we're gonna have some classics on our hands on that shelf behind you guys.
That's the formula. We figured it out. So
yeah, that's what I need to start doing. Why am I telling people my full name?
Yeah.
Well, no. Okay. So my next question is, and I guess if you're gonna start, so you guys have written, you know, Jack Zulu. You've got what, 10 Green Ember books at least in the series. I think you've got some other. I didn't do my greatest research here, but it feels like you have some books outside of the mainline series as well, possibly. So
Yeah.
if you're going to start another book tomorrow, like what's your first step? Do you have this raft of drafts that you just go blindly pull one out and you're like, okay, this is the book we're writing? Or is it like, I need a specific idea? Or I know from taking your course, you know, you encourage people to write every day. So there's always just this, you know, this practice, this habit of writing, and so you're not, you know, fumbling around in the dark. But what do you guys think is kind of the biggest step, the most important step, the first step, whatever you want to choose out of that?
We can. I'll hit you with like our process for Jack Zulu, and you can kind of see what you think about that. For me with the Green Ember, yeah, there's 4 of the sort of the main books in the series, and then there are 2 separate trilogies. One is sort of a story looking back, and one is sort of goes right alongside the main stories. So there are 10 Green Ember books so far, and hopefully, Lord willing, more to come. Yeah, for me, the idea part is not I think ideas are pretty easy in a sense. Like I think they're far easier than the execution for most writers. I think most writers are, you know, great at ideas. And you can talk to a million people. Oh, I've got an idea for a book. I've got a book in me. It's always like everybody wants to be, you know, writing. Everybody has an idea. The difference comes when you start executing, and execution is hard. Sitting down and writing, and there are all kinds of cliche writer quotes about that. About you know, a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for most people. I think that's a true statement. I cannot remember who said that, but it wasn't me. But I'm repeating it now. But yeah, I think the execution stage is always really important, and it's also, you know, or really, even if you break that hurdle of like, I'm going to sit down to write, the beginning of it is often the easiest. And then it's like you get to a certain point and then it becomes very, very hard. And so to me, like the persistence of sticking with it. And I think one key to unlock that is to be comfortable not being great, especially when you're beginning. Get good at being bad is the way I say it in The Green Rider. And that's because it's like you've got to be, everything that we do, we're bad at some point, unless we're just like in some kind of super rare kind of a thing. And you probably don't have to worry about that. Like every basketball player, every person that you admire in any field was bad at some point, and they persisted, which actually requires, we often talk about passion, like I want to be, you know, are you passionate about this? That's great, but really determination is more important than passion, because you don't always feel like doing something, but if you're determined, that's a game changer. So determination and like persistence, those kinds of things, I think qualities that aren't always often associated with sort of the creative life. We're more like, oh, I have this feeling, or I have a poetic soul, or, you know, which all kind of lends towards like, if I'm in the mood, I will write down beautiful things will strike. And you don't really think of it as a craft, which I think helps. With the other ingredient is humility. So if you have like determination and humility, those are like 2 of your biggest, that will actually get you past people who have far more talent, because talent doesn't work. It doesn't have to work necessarily, and I mean, it can, but that's really explosive if you've got the talent, and but you've got some talent, and if you put it to work through humility and determination, you're ahead of like 99% of the world right there.
You've often told me, Dad, that like just writing is like often more important than what you actually write. Just getting words on paper, just like putting in the work is more important than it actually being good.
Yeah, and I believe that. I think that's true as far as just like you gotta practice. Like, we see you see Michael Jordan or Steph Curry or somebody just making shots and doing things in incredible games, and you don't see the hundreds of thousands of hours that they put in the gym. And if you dig a little bit deep, you see, oh, he was a guy that came early and stayed late and took more shots and worked harder. And that's like, you almost always see that. And so I just think like that's really, it fits with sort of for us, the Christian worldview of like thinking of ourselves, not just as people who are brilliant creative artists who are ready to express themselves and people gather around while we express ourselves. Like, it's our approach is more about love and service is better than fame and self-expression. So I'd like to think of myself more like a line cook or like someone who's serving something up instead of some enlightened elite who's above everybody. And I love the Pauline vision of the body of Christ having many members and different talents. So it's like becoming an artist or a storyteller doesn't put you in an elite category. It's beautiful, it's glorious, it's incredible. We love it. It's magical, really. But it's also a very humble, ordinary vocation that's rooted in love and service. And it's about giving people a gift. And so we got to give people a gift. That's what it's about. So I think that was a guiding principle for how we executed on Jack Zulu, actually. And I think it was kind of cool because, so this is Josiah's idea. He wrote it as a show. He was writing a treatment for a show. And we talked about adapting it as a novel, and he graciously allowed me, and we, brought a lot to the table as far as ideas too. We're interacting a lot, but he's really the driver on the idea side for the book. But even his approach is, I love that. It's been so fun working with him because it hasn't been I don't know, like fathers and sons can have ego clashes anyway, but I think him holding sort of this ideas about Jack Zulu and the Waylander's Key, like with such open hands and ready to sort of like be generous, because the aim is the audience. Because it's not like I am the most brilliant person in the world, I have the greatest ideas and everyone will conform to me. It's not that. It's like, how do we serve the audience? How do we give them a gift? And if that's your motivation, it kind of liberates you. It can liberate you from some of the sort of insane avarice, this insane arrogance that sometimes accompanies creative work. So I got to tip my hat to him, just as a young man, just having a heart for the audience, and us trying to, under the lordship of Christ, trying to see those kids and families who will read this book as sort of our North Star. How do we give them a gift? And that's more important. It's sort of like the best idea wins. So collaborating on that's been really fun. We could talk about what that collaboration process was like, but we're getting kind of into it a little bit here.
Sure.
But to me, it seems like you can overcome a whole lot of the obstacles that appear if your fundamental orientation is, I want to give a gift, I want to serve, I'm a storyteller, there's somebody else involved, I want to love them. How do we do that? That feels really, really key.
That's awesome. Josiah, I want to know, how did you deal with and how do you deal with, you're how many years are you behind your dad, and like he's been writing for this amount and now you've been, so sometimes it can be easy to compare ourselves to others. And here you have someone you not only look up to, but is encouraging to you, but is also, more farther down the path than you are. So can you talk a little bit about like your thought process through that, or things you've had to deal with? Or
Yeah, definitely. I think the point is that he's super old. I mean, he's hundreds of years ahead of me.
Yeah, he's very wise, mature.
Old, I think is the word. He's got a great sense of humor. He's passed that down to me right now.
I'm in my prime right now.
So I feel like I'm just here to learn right now. Like I'm I'm still a student in school. I'm just trying to like soak up as much information as I can, you know, and I'm trying to get good at stories, you know, and it's just super awesome to have a dad who's a professional writer, you know, because I've been able to just kind of talk through stories with him and kind of learn his process and understand better like how what's succeeded for him and what's failed, you know. And I just think it's just a really it's an unfair advantage, honestly, and it's cool. It's a super cool thing to have, you know.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to hear that it was a treatment for a show. So do you envision maybe your writing would look a little different in the future, as maybe not necessarily always doing novels, but like you have this writing skill that you're developing, and maybe it'll look, and maybe you'll write something and that'll get turned into like the Wingfeather Saga, something like that. It'll be an animated show or things like that.
Yeah, that would be incredible. I think we both still kind of got the vision that is kind of a goal of ours. It's not the main goal, you know, we're focused on this novel right now, getting this out to the world. But that would be an incredible experience to have, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, to adapt this for the screen. Because I feel like in some ways that's kind of how my brain works as far as story goes, is more maybe visual and cinematic than like necessarily verbal.
Yeah.
And Josiah is he's a little bit modest, but he's written screenplays and lots of treatments. He's creating other shows right now. Jack Zulu, he's working on adapting that for a show. So my belief is it's going to be a fantastic series, and it's destined for that. I think that would be a very natural home for it. That is how it began with him. We have adapted it in this way that it's got its own life. It's a cool iteration. That is going to be fun. And I think that he's, my belief is that he'll end up being a fantastic director and
Cool.
writer. He loves all the different sort of elements that come together to make a visual story. Music, he is an artist. He loves the framing, that sort of thinking through, is great with story. Learning all the things he needs to learn, dialogue, that kind of thing. So I think he's going to be a fantastic visual storyteller. And yeah, he already is writing scripts. He's getting better at it. And that's the thing. If I could, you could say, oh, he's so unusual. And you did talk about unfair advantages. That's true in a lot of senses. But I'm going to tell you that the reason he'll succeed, if he does, in that world is because he works. He works so hard. He works very, very hard. This book and this series is a product largely of his determination, not just skill, and it's not just born with it kind of stuff. It's like he's hustled. And the truth is, I learned a lot from him. I mean, my last Green Ember book, Prince Lander and the Dragon War, had a lot to do with his story instincts helping me think through it. And that's really true for a lot of the last several books. So he brings a lot to it. I'll get a lot of credit because I'm the established author and everything, but he's bringing a lot to it. And I would just say, like, don't trick yourself. If you're listening to this and think, well, sure, your dad's written some best-selling books, then of course don't trick yourself. You can do it. The barriers that are in front of you are probably you're probably placing them there yourself. Mm-hmm. And determination will cover an awful lot of that. It really will.
Well, we're getting close to the end here. So as we're talking about the future, what's one thing, like the most important idea you want every story that you tell from here on out to communicate? If you could sum it up, or if you can try to, is there a big idea that you want, besides what you've shared with us so far, that you just want people to get from these stories?
I know. I mean, I can talk about this stuff because I think about it a lot. There's several, but to me, I don't know. The one thing that I feel like we found in the heart of Jack Zulu and the Waylander's Key, and it feels like it's in the heart of a lot of the Green Ember books. There are several themes that are shared, but one of them, to me, I don't know what you think, but it's sort of this like picking the way of life or the way of death. That like the way of life is sometimes hard, but it's sort of the way of humility. It's the way of surrender. It's the way of love. It's the way of gratitude. It's the way of wonder. And then the way of death is the way of grasping, the way of dominating, the way of selfishness, the way of ingratitude, the way of envy, the way of striving. And I feel like those fundamental sort of things that really gets contrasted starkly, I think, actually maybe not starkly and then starkly in Jack Zulu.
That's cryptic.
Is this sort of way of life and the way of death, like that feels really like central to me right now. I think it's like it's a diamond. Is our book a diamond?
It's a diamond.
It's a diamond, but you can kind of look at it from different angles. I think there's different things I think that you can find, but that's one I'm like, just it's on my mind right now. Is there something else there?
I think that's so true. I mean, we're both Christians, and we just care a lot about, like we've been saying, like serving the kids and the families who are going to read this. And so, like, any way that we can make these books, these stories, be like lights in the darkness is like that's the number one goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. And even being honest, like just telling the truth feels very radical now, and maybe it always, I think it always has been. I don't know if we need to get particular, like, oh my goodness, everything is so awful right now. There are challenges that exist right now, but I think what is refreshing is reality with a capital R. And I'm fond of saying this, and I'll just keep plagiarizing my friend Heidi. I'm not plagiarizing her, I'm quoting her, but my friend Heidi White, she says that the best, most faithful stories, and she's really talking about stories that are informed by sort of the biblical worldview, that are honest about the world. She says that they're not, we get accused of escapism with writing novels, writing fantasy. She says they're not an escape from reality. They're an escape into reality. So I think we want Jack Zulu and the Waylander's Key to be an escape into reality. We want the Green Ember series to be an escape into reality. And whether that's a novel or the shows when they eventually come, if they do, or whatever we work on, I feel like we want them to resonate with sort of the reality of the way that God made the world in a generous way, in a humble way, that we're placing ourselves sort of under the lordship of Jesus Christ, that he tells the truth about the world. And when we are faithful to him, even if we're not sort of telling parables or allegories, which we don't do, we can still tell stories that are faithful to reality.
I love it. Yeah, I just read something about the difference between Tolkien and George R.R. Martin. And it's kind of like what you were talking about, is like one of those guys talks about how being good will just end up destroying you and you'll get stabbed in the back. And the other one talked about how in order to defeat bad, you have to do the opposite of what they're doing. And, and I saw that a lot in the Green Ember too, was like, instead of giving in to what everybody else is thinking or doing, I have to rise above it, or I have to go around it by doing something different, and by being set apart, by being a light. And so I really appreciate that idea that you guys are out there sharing with people. So tell us where we can get Jack Zulu, and then tell us where to find you guys as well, as far as like keeping up with your adventures and when you release more books and things like that.
Cool. Do you know where to find our book?
You can find our book on sdsmith.com/store.
You can buy it.
Okay.
JackZulu.com is easy. It's easy to remember.
It has a website too.
JackZulu.com, you can find stuff about our book. And yeah, if it's hopefully, I don't know when this will come out, but it'll probably be available for pre-order. And it'll come out this fall, and it's the first of a whole new series. So I hope you can get a first edition, and it might even be signed by us, which could. It
would probably decrease the value, honestly.
Try to find an unsigned copy if you can, but do your best.
Well, thank you again to JC and Sam, Josiah and Sam, for coming on this episode of the podcast. I really enjoyed getting to meet them. Meeting a father and son team is really cool. It's always great when Destination Arte gets to meet families who are working on creative things together. I know my family member that's normally helping with this is missing in this episode. But it was great to meet Sam and Josiah and just hear their heart for the stories that they're writing and the people they're writing those stories for. That's very consistent with Sam's messaging in the Green Writer course, which I need you to go check out if you want to become a writer, or if you need some encouragement, or if you know someone in your life who wants to be a writer. Just look up the Green Writer course. You'll find that right away online. And then follow Sam on Instagram. I'm going to read it out. SD Smithereens is the name of his Instagram. So SD Smith and then EREENS, Smithereens. So follow him there. And then, as always, JackZulu.com is where you can get that book that they just released. We recorded this episode a little while ago, but in the meantime, Jack Zulu and the Waylander's Key has been released. So you should go check that book out. support Josiah as he has goals of writing not only books, but shows and things like that. This has been a wonderful episode. It's been a blessing to me and an encouragement. So you can subscribe to the Creative Community Podcast on Apple Podcasts, on SoundCloud, on Spotify, on Stitcher, on Spreaker, on Amazon. The other day I was at someone's house. I said, "Hey, Alexa," and she turned on and I said, "Play the Creative Community Podcast." And she played it. It was episode 142. It was great. So subscribe to us on there for more interviews like this and more storytelling prompts like Mark and I get on and have our little creative brainstorming sessions together and record those for you guys. And then follow Destination Arete on Instagram, Destination ARETE, to keep up with when new episodes come out and to be involved in community things. And then the last thing I'm going to tell you about is our newsletter, destinationarete.com/contact or destinationarete@gmail.com. That's how you get involved in the forefront of things. If we're ever looking for people to be involved in helping us create the show, that's where you'll find out about it first. If you ever want to be involved in helping us make other things, community events, sometimes we get together in various geographical locations around the country. That is how you get involved with that, is through the newsletter. So go check that out, and we will be back in 2 weeks with another episode. See you guys then.